Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for bearing with me for the last session of the day. Just before VMworld Fest, before we start the party, so let's try to automate ourselves to a party. My name is Martijn Smit. I like to make dad jokes, so apologies for that. I'm a technical marketing architect for Network Insight, meaning I'm just in the product team and I like to code. This is why I'm introducing this session here, just to show you a little bit what's possible and how you can do certain things within with PowerShell and Python within Network Insight. I'm going to take you through a little bit of a smaller agenda, like why would you even want to automate Network Insight and how does the API look, what do you need to take care with, and then go into demos on PowerShell and the Python SDK, just because I like to tinker and slides are boring anyway. So, really quickly, what is Network Insight? So, if you're not familiar with Network Insight, it is a holistic troubleshooting and monitoring tool for your network, as the marketing guy in me would want to say. But basically, it just uses you to get network visibility into your entire network, physical, virtual, doesn't really matter. You can use it to plan out microsegmentation projects. You can use it to migrate applications because you've got a lot of data that can support those migrations. And then you can also use it to troubleshoot and optimize those networks because we have that insight. So far for the marketing spiel. Why would you want to automate Network Insight? There's a bunch of reasons. I've been working with organizations that want to automate data source import. So if they have a lot of switches, a lot of vCenters, they do not want to do that all manually. So they just want to fire off a script and get all the switches and all the other data sources imported into Network Insight like instantly. But also if they have a automating scenario when it comes to adding a new switch to the network, for example. So they have a CMDB. Every time they put in a new switch into that CMDB, they would automatically be pushed into Network Insight as well. Also for applications, so Network Insight has a lot of application context, so you can do troubleshooting and monitoring based on the application level. And those application constructs needs to be learned by Network Insight, and you can either import those via the API, or you can do that manually, or you can use the application discovery. But typically, if you have a way to roll out applications, an automation portal or something like that, you would also want to get that context into Network Insight right away. So it's part of the automation chain in that case. That's all pushing information towards Network Insight, but you also want to pull data sometimes. Look at security use cases where if there's a specific trigger in the network, you might want to enrich your security information and event management system, your SIEM system, with actual NetFlow information that is stored inside Network Insight, so you can pull out the flow information, the network flow. You can export recommended file rules from NSX from Network Insight, just to import them into your own security system or maybe NSX or etc. Basically, every single byte of data inside Network Insight is available for export. So how does it look? Well, you really cannot call yourself an API anymore unless you're RESTful, so it's a RESTful API. It has got built-in OpenAPI documentation, so you can go into the menu inside vRealize. You can actually open up the documentation itself, and you would be able to get the example API calls, all the different things that are available. And also look at all the available endpoints. So like you can do application management, data store management, and I'm not going to read everything all that. I'm just going to show you. So this is raw API, so you can use your own tooling, your own scripting to talk to this API, but you can also use a couple of frameworks, a couple of tools that we as a product team put out there. One of them is vRealize, which is obviously a PowerShell module. It's on GitHub, it's open source, it has around 90-95% of the API calls. The most important ones are there. And you can just install that and then use PowerShell to also grab data from Network Insight or push data sources or applications, etc. Second one is the Python SDK. where we have just the Python SDK. So the Python library that we generated from there is actually generated directly from the OpenAI API specification, which is pretty cool because that means that you can use everything that the public API has available. So instead of me going into vRealize and creating new functions every time the product team adds something new into the API, we can just run the API generator, and the API code, the SDK will come rolling out, and you will be able to use everything from there. All right, so instead of slides, I don't like slides, so let me show you a couple things. You go away. So I've put the URLs on the slides for your reference, but just to show you the GitHub repository, this is vRealize. It hosts a bunch of examples, but it's also published on the PowerShell gallery. So you can actually install it just using the install module command within PowerShell, which I'm about to show you. So you can come in, you can download the module, you can actually do pull requests as well if you want to add something, please do. And it's just hosted there. Same goes for the Python SDK, that's located in the VMware GitHub repository. This will be updated every time a new version of Network Insights comes out, because it's kind of integrated into the pipeline, the release pipeline of Network Insight to generate this SDK. Now, I'm actually going to switch over to Visual Code, and let me see if I got the right one. No. Go away. Here we go. Okay. So what I've got running here is, Visual Studio Code. If you're not familiar with it, please look it up, because it's one of my favorite code editors since it came out. It has a lot of functionality. One of them is actually being able to run your code inside a container. So that's exactly what I'm doing right now for this demo. I've connected it to Docker, which is running on my laptop, and then I'm able to generate a sort of a dev container JSON, where the only thing that I'm doing is pointing towards a Docker file that then gets executed once you want to run this code. The only thing that I'm giving with it is that it needs to run PowerShell when it starts up, and then I want to add the PowerShell module to the actual Visual Studio Code instance that's going to be running in that container. Then quickly the Docker file. So I'm just pulling the PowerShell Docker container image from a Microsoft repository. I'm just doing a quick update, and then I'm setting the PowerShell gallery as trusted. I want to do this because I want to install vRealize from the PowerShell gallery. I've already run this or built this container, so it takes a couple minutes to download and etc. So I'm not going to wait on that. But what I've got here under the code is actually that container. So let me jump back to no. Let me see if I can actually install vRealize here, because it's a clean instance. So I want to get vRealize here. It just goes to the PowerShell gallery. It looks at the latest version, then it goes ahead and installs it, and then you can import the module just like you would as other modules, and you would have everything available to you. So if I look at the commands that are now available for the vRealize module, you can see a bunch of get commands, so getting information from Network Insight and using that for different purposes. But the first thing that I need to do is I actually need to connect to Network Insight in order to exchange a login for a authentication token. That authentication token is then used for the next API calls, just as so you just don't have to use your password every time you want to do an API call, just to make it a little bit more obscure. There's a bunch of things here, so you can see which data stores there are. You can see the flows, the network flows that are actually generated inside Network Insight, and then you can pull those out. So everything that you want to pull out from Network Insight, you can basically look at the get commands. So if I look at the the connect vRealize server first, because I need to connect first, but I need to know how that actually works. So I do the standard get help, and every commandlet within vRealize has this help text in there. So you can see what kind of parameters there are. So you need to add a server, a username, password, or a PS credential. You can do that as well. However, you can also add the examples part, and then you would see actual examples on how to do it. So every commandlet would have these examples, just to give you a little bit more of an idea how to use it. But in this case, I'm just gonna use this, and then I actually cheated something to speed it up a little bit. Here we go. And that's the wrong one, sure. PGA local. So the username and password to connect to the vRealize instance. So this is my Network Insight platform appliance, and then I will return this this authorization token, and it will just remember that and use that for the next API calls. So now I can go into let's say data source management, vRealize data source for example. So Network Insight has these data sources like your vCenter, NSX, physical switches, etc. And let me just get the data source type of NSXT, for example. Then it goes out to Network Insight, sees which data sources are configured there. You can see we've got two NSXT managers, one NSX South and one NSX PKS manager. You have the host name, the entity ID, etc. But also the nickname that you can give it inside Network Insight. So you can then use this to manage these data sources if you'd like. However, I just want to add a new one. In this case, I'm just going to go through a new vRealize data source, and then you know what? Let's look at the help first, so that I don't do it badly. So you can see the parameters again. So username and password, credentials, hostname for the data source itself. I want to get a little bit more specific and get examples, because there's a little bit more that you need to do in order to actually add a data source. You need to get something called a collector ID. So the collector ID is the appliance that actually goes out to the data source, the vCenter, the physical switch, to collect the data, and you need to get those nodes, so you can assign it to a specific collector. In this case, this is really generic because I'm just getting all the vRealize nodes, so the nodes that are a part of the Network Insight setup. And I'm just looking at the proxy VM, but now I've got the collector ID in this variable, so I can use it for the next step. So I want to do the new vRealize data source step, and then I want to add a NSXT data source, and then I can use this one for adding the FKDUN. And this is my new NSXT manager that I want to add. This is the username and password for it, and I need to give it a nickname as well. Let's just do that the same as the host name. And then you also need the collector ID. Oh, and this goes much easier inside the parameters itself. And then it goes out using that collector ID, and this is yep. This is my. I've kind of did around 4 demos already, so the demo guides are not that favorable to me anymore, I think. And I'm using also a beta version of vRealize, so this is not going to work. Typically, it will go out to Network Insight. It would add the data source and then return its details. So just like you saw outputting here, so entity ID, the FKDN, the proxy ID, etc. It will return that when it actually succeeds. But yeah, it's the beauty of live demos. So let's have a look at something else. Let's get rid of one. If I look at, again, the NSXT data sources that are in the system, I want to filter on the, let's say, the nickname, and that's going to be the NSX South one. Just to see if I actually get only the NSX South back. Okay, so that's good. And now I want to remove it because the NSXT instance is no longer in use or something like that. Then I remove it. Gives me just an OK back, just an HTTP 200, if it works. Awesome. Nope. So it's gonna time out now, I think. Oh, here we go. Then I do the get data source again, and now you can see that the NSX South is gone. So this is just a small, simple example on how you can manage data sources, but also applications and all the other data that's in Network Insight. But let's move on to something else. If you're actually doing just raw APIs, if you want to use your own module or your own scripting, you can also use PowerNSX in a debug fashion. And then it will actually list all the API calls that it will do against the Network Insight appliance. So if I enter this debug parameter, you'll see, all right, can I continue? Yes, I want to have the data source with NSXT. And then it does a first get to the API URL to get all the NSXT managers. And then it will get a list back of all the NSXT managers that are in the system. In this case, it's just one. And then it will go through all those NSXT managers and get the details. So using that entity ID that you saw in the earlier example, it will fetch back the data from it. And then it will return the information. And then you can see the PowerShell output. But if you just want to see it, what kind of API calls it does, you can also use it for that purpose. All right, let's have a quick look at the Python version. There we go. Okay, so the Python SDK is, as mentioned, it's automatically generated. So there will be a Swagger client attached to it, and Swagger is sort of like the predecessor for OpenAPI and has a bunch of things that makes it a little bit easier to use those automatic generated SDKs. So you will see that once you download it, you will see the Swagger client py 2.7.egg, and the only thing that you need to do is put that in your environment variable, so your Python path. After doing so, you will be able to create these types of scripts. I'm just going to walk you through a little bit on what it's actually doing. So I have a Init API Client here, which is located inside one of these other scripts, which does a bunch of initialization. It gets the username and password and the host name for the vRealize platform, etc. Just to make it a little bit easier to use these examples. Then it imports that Swagger client that I was talking about. So that's a generic module that you can download, and that it will get. I've got some SDK utilities in order to make it life a little bit easier, but I want to highlight the structure that we have here. So what happens is we initialize a specific API client class, which relates to the documentation, and that becomes a little bit more clear if I go here and show you the actual documentation, because this is Network Insight, and if you go to the API documentation, you will get that OpenAPI documentation. So this will pop up. You will see a bunch of subjects, topics, sort of like data source management, applications, entities, etc. And this is the documentation that I was talking about, where you also get all the examples. So you get authentication, data sources, search, etc. You can open these ones up and then get the actual API end calls, but also the examples on what the result would be, but also how you would need to format it. So you can use this for your API development. But the reason why I wanted to show you this is because that translates to that automatically generated SDK. For example, the search as the API is one of those topics that's in the OpenAPI specification. So it initialize one of those classes. I do some logging here. We come up with a filter string because what this script is going to do, it's going to export some network flows from Network Insight. So I want to get all the flows that are tagged that it's internet traffic and that the source data center is named like this. So this is your vCenter data center name. So this is the filter string that we're going to use to export those flows. We're going to create the actual search query. So we're looking for specific flows, which is an entity type, then the filter string, and we want to get a page back of 100 results. We log the actual end result, and then we execute the search result. So using the filter and the dictionary that we've made here, we actually pass that towards the actual API call, and then it uses the parameters inside the dictionary to execute the API call. So this all goes to a CSV file in this case. So this is not even related to the SDK. It goes through all the pages that it gets returned because the API will return pages. So page 1 is result 1 to 100, page 2 is 101 to 200, etc. So we loop through all those pages, and we get all the entities, so all the flows from those pages, and we actually list the total count, and then we go towards the actual results. And we fire up another class. We fire up the entities API. So again, that in the documentation there was the entities, the entities topic, and then we get the details of that specific flow using the entity ID. So that entity ID that I've been referring to is pretty important. You'll also see that with PowerVRI, but also the Python SDK. That's just the underlying ID that Network Insight uses. So we're looking at the flow name here, which is login that. We're sleeping a little bit to prevent getting throttled by the API because it has a protection, so you cannot rapidly fire all the API calls that you want. And then we look at, are there any security groups in this flow, like NSX security groups or AWS security groups, if they're attached to the flow. And then we write that to a CSV file. So we get the source IP address, the IP address of that, the source, the destination IP address. We get the friendly name from the port, and also the source VM name, so what VM is sending this traffic. And then if there's any security groups, it will test that as well, and then it will write that towards that CSV. So this uses the options that are available, the values that are available inside that API, but it's kind of huge. I mean, you can deep dive into the SDK itself and see what kind of values, what kind of fields can I actually extract from this source IP. So IP address is one, but also VM name. You can use data center name, vSphere data center name. You can use the security groups, etc. That's all inside this flow record information. And then it just goes around and around until it gets to a specific page count. So when the results are done, it will just break out and save the CSV. All right. So this is very quickly on how to get started with PowerVRI plus the SDK. Honestly, it's not enough to actually understand and use it right away. If you are interested in using either of these frameworks, just go to the GitHub pages, which are available in my presentation. Look at how you can use it, and figure out how to get the right commandlets or in the Python class the right functions and the right objects. Any questions? Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is to get the health of the vRealize status itself. And yes, in 5.1, vRealize 5.1, the latest release, you can actually pull that from the API. And that's also in the get vRealize nodes in Power vRealize, for example. So you can take that, yeah. Yeah. So is the question if you can export the topologies? Did I?
Excuse me. Okay.
Oh yeah, that's better.
Thank you. Yeah. So if you log in into one, right, you see a couple of DFW rules which are duplicate. So if you have any script which can help me in closing those duplicate DFW rules, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not only just exporting those rules. The code which I saw, right? You are calling the API calls, right, from NSX Manager in the debug mode.
Yeah.
So that's where I got interested. Do you have any script on the GitHub or something?
Yes, there are for both versions, so Power vRealize, but also the Python SDK. There are examples in the GitHub repositories. So in this case, I've got a bunch here. So you can import data sources at bulk. You can export those flows, the ones that I was looking at. Specifically to get the masked file rules that you're talking about. I do not have that in an example, but that's an event that's generated from a network inside. So there is a get event API call.
But I can invoke debug managers there as well.
Yes,
right?
yes, exactly. So if you want to get the raw API call, you can use Power vRealize to do the get event, the get vRealize event, and then invoke the debug parameter, and you will have the actual API call.
And then push it to NSX Manager while once that is.
Yeah, if you want, yeah, sure. You can do whatever you want with that output.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
And this is your page on GitHub, right?
The SDK Python that's kind of generated by Network Inside Engineering. It is public. The Power vRealize one is also public, but just kind of generated by me manually.
Thank you. Here you go.
Another one. Okay, could you? Yeah.
Thanks. With the monitoring of the services, do you think it would be possible to query those without having to provide credentials? So for example, imagine a monitoring system that hits those, right? Unauthenticated, just service monitoring. It's no information that's critical. Would that be something that would be possible, or do you always have to provide credentials?
Not right now.
Okay.
You always need to, I'll note it down. I'll note it down.
Thanks.
You will also always need to provide credentials before you can actually do any API call at all.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. It's just, for example, some API calls, you shouldn't have to. Like, for example, monitoring service health and things like that. For example, VRA, you can monitor unauthenticated. You're just monitoring the services. This would be nice.
Yep.
VROPS as well, you can monitor the node states and things like that. So without having to authenticate. So just out of curiosity.
I'll take that with me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Good. Then I'm right on time. That's cool. Thank you very much. Enjoy VMware Fest.
Thank you.